The minutes from April 6th, April 17th, and May 8th have been circulated. Are there any omissions or corrections that are required? There are none. We consider the minutes accepted and approved as printed. The next is messages from the governor. Messages from the governor, there are none. Announcements by the speaker, there are none. Messages from the Senate, there are none. Papers and other communications to the House. We have 8 such papers today. First is in the name of the Premier. Premier, would you like to present your paper?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honourable House Assembly the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Continuing Precautions Amendment Number 2, Regulations 2020.
Thank you.
I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honourable House Assembly the Information Commissioner's Office Annual Report 2019.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. The next paper is in the name of the Deputy Premier. Deputy?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Speaker. I have the honor to attach and submit for the information of the Honourable House Assembly the following regulations: Debt Collection General Regulations 2020, Electronic Communications Regulatory Authority Fees Regulations 2020, Fisheries Lobster Regulations 2020, Fisheries Lobster Amendment Regulations 2020. Further, Mr. Speaker, Debt Collection Transitional Period Extension Order 2020 and Development and Planning Delegation Notice 2020. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Deputy. And I believe that's all the papers for this morning. The next item is petitions. We have no petitions. And then we move on to statements by ministers and junior ministers. And we have 7 statements, actually 6 statements this morning. And the first, again, in the name of the Premier. Premier, would you like to present your statement?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda is justifiably proud of its ability to act on the world stage in all manner of ways and in several spheres. We are resilient and innovative, and to a large extent, we can fend for ourselves. But, Mr. Speaker, everyone can use help. While I'm certainly not old enough to remember this song, Mr. Speaker, and it may not exactly be my musical taste, the Beatles' 1967 hit, I Get By With a Little Help from My Friends, may best describe how we have managed during this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, early in this global event, immediate action was taken to shut our borders, and our airport was closed to scheduled commercial flights. This necessary action left some Bermudians stranded in countries in which they were visiting, studying, or undergoing medical treatment. Mr. Speaker, returning residents of means sourced private jets to return them to Bermuda, and in keeping with the condition precedent for the approval of such flights, they inevitably accommodated Bermudians needing to return home in seats that would have otherwise been empty. I wish to thank the leaders of the international business sector who responded to this call and through their acceptance of our policy and understanding the needs to get Bermudians home have restored students and other loved ones to their welcoming arms of their families. Mr. Speaker, honorable members will know that in an effort to shore up its own supplies at home, the United States Department of Homeland Security adopted stringent measures around the export of any equipment destined for countries also fighting the pandemic. This was applied to items bound for Bermuda, and we were able to call on friends in the U.S. Congress to unstick a process that stood to deprive us of much needed medical supplies. Mr. Speaker, in countries all over the world, social commentators have initiated discussion that must serve to prick the conscience of us all. This pandemic has laid bare the raw inequality in modern society. Even the veneer of affluence we enjoy in Bermuda cannot now mask the fragility of people's existence. To that end, what is commonly referred to as the third sector, has mounted a Herculean effort to meet the needs of people during this period. Mr. Speaker, numerous agencies have provided meals, grocery vouchers, access to services, and support for a significant number of people in the community. To date, emergency funds raised and coordinated by the Bermuda Cuny Foundation total some $1.84 million, and $1.5 million of that has been spent in support of the charitable objective, including the provision of an average of 10,000 meals per week. These efforts have been supplemented by some of our local hotel partners, like the Lauren and the Fairmont Hamilton Princess, who have both kept their staff employed while fueling citizens in need and our frontline workers. This support has been invaluable, and on behalf of the governments of the people of Bermuda, I wish to thank all donors, volunteers, and supporters for their work. I should particularly recognize Dr. Myron Virgil, Vivian Carter, and Tina Nash, who skillfully led the coordination of this effort. Mr. Speaker, I should also like to thank Mr. and Mrs. Richard Yemi Odita, who donated $15,000 for supplies and PPE, and also a fee for the most generous donation of $416,000 to the Bermuda Hospitals Board for ventilators. In addition, the Bermuda Hospitals Charitable Trust donated $500,000 to the Bermuda Hospitals Board for the provision of additional supplies and ventilators. Mr. Speaker, tangible support for our efforts here at home has come from Her Majesty's government in the United Kingdom. Almost 200 Bermuda residents were able to make it home on 2 Airbus flights arranged by the UK government at a nominal cost to travelers. Further, Mr. Speaker, in spite of the challenge supplied in the UK, Bermuda was pleased to receive today 15,000 PCR tests, 26,000 N95 masks, 3,000 surgical masks, 1,000 digital thermometers, and 5,000 swabs. Laboratory consumables, including single-use data loggers, ASTABs, and sanitizer, and over 150,000 other PPE items like gloves and aprons. Mr. Speaker, honorable members should note that the cost of these items has been met from the UK's Conflict, Security and Stability Fund. Government House, the Deputy Governor, the Governor, and Deputy Governor in particular have marshaled considerable operation to realize these critical supplies for Bermuda, and we thank them for this effort. Mr. Speaker, across borders and sectors in Bermuda, our people and various institutions have been ably supported by the assistance provided by others, in many cases refusing to accept recognition for it. Among the selfless gestures made recently, Mr. Speaker, came from Bermudian senior, who wrote to me asking how he could surrender his social insurance pension to support someone else because his success in his working life meant that he could do without it. Mr. Speaker, this is a novel proposition, but the sentiment is as old as we are as people, generous, caring, and sensitive to the needs of others. As I indicated in my public remarks on Wednesday evening, this is the spirit that will carry us from the potential harm this pandemic has done to our society through the recovery and beyond. Long may it continue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. The next statement this morning is in the name of the Deputy Premier. Deputy Premier.
Hello, Mr. Speaker.
Morning.
And good morning this morning. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to update this Honourable House about the ongoing measures being taken to ensure Bermuda food supply, to ensure Bermuda has a safe food supply and local food production. Mr. Speaker, we find ourselves in extraordinary times. Not only does the pandemic caused by COVID-19 virus continue to test global health resources, but also global food supply chains. One cannot help but read with concern in the international media headline reports of food processing plant closures in the United States and wonder how this is going to affect our grocery store shelves. Not in recent memory has our local food security been of great importance. Mr. Speaker, to this I can say the island's supply chain has proven to be robust and our private sector suppliers resourceful. I must take this opportunity to thank our suppliers, wholesalers, grocery store owners, farmers, and fishermen for all their efforts over the past weeks to ensure that we continue to have good availability of food and that our shelves remain stocked. I have been communicating regularly with our shippers, wholesalers, grocery store owners, and representatives of the commercial farmers and fishermen throughout this period from March to date. They have been forthcoming with their ideas and efforts to ensure that the essential food products continue to be available, and I applaud them in their efforts. The public will, I am sure, have noticed some periodic gaps in the shelves, and there have been some challenges in securing meat products. However, the core products continue to be available, albeit with less variety of specialty items. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Minister of National Security and his team for all their efforts to coordinate with our key stakeholders to ensure that the island's food security is in the best possible shape. The discussions have been extremely useful, not only allowing direct communication between the government and our local food suppliers, but also between our grocery stores, shipping lines, and distributors. These discussions have created an open forum to identify emerging issues, share solutions, and make decisions quickly to ensure that critical food supplies reach the island as efficiently as possible. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to our local environment. This unprecedented situation really makes us appreciate our island. Not only are we one of the most beautiful places on earth, but we can be bountiful too. The past growing season was good. Our farmers' fields produce well, and there have been a good supply of local produce that is normally found at this time. Locally, all major commercial growers continue to be busy. The unfortunate loss of the sale of hotels, restaurants, meant that farmers had a larger supply of local produce for direct sale to the public. The dairy farms and commercial fishermen have found themselves in a similar situation. Mr. Speaker, over the past several weeks, with the shelter in place in effect, the government has strived to keep the public safe, while also allowing our farmers and fishermen to sell their fresh vegetables, fish, and meat products. I would like to take this opportunity to make the public aware that while farmers and fishermen can sell directly to grocery stores, many are operating roadside stands, as well as providing prepaid pickup and delivery services. For the awareness of the public, roadside stands can be in operation from Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The grocery store's surname system does not apply to farmers and fishermen roadside stands, and anyone can partake of their services during these opening times. For the ease of finding a location nearest to you, sites for farmer and fisherman stands will be posted and have been posted on the government portal and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources website, www.environment.pm. However, Mr. Speaker, I must be extremely clear. Any customers visiting these stands must practice social distancing, even though it is out in the open. Other requirements include only 2 vendors per site. Sellers and customers must wear masks. Customers must be a minimum of 6 feet apart, and hand sanitizer must be available for the sellers. Teams from the Ministry of Home Affairs are regularly visiting sites and have the authority under the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Continuing Precautions Regulation 2020 to close a location down immediately if these requirements are not being met. Mr. Speaker, over the next 4 to 8 weeks, our main growing season will be winding down, and we will move to the hotter time of the year, the hotter summer season. The public can expect that there will be a dearth of local vegetables between July and September. And this is due to the seasonality of the produce and is not related to the pandemic. This is an annual thing. It is anticipated that supplies of fresh produce will continue to be imported from overseas. That said, Mr. Speaker, our local farmers are now gearing up their short-term schedules to address our current local situation in light of the progression of the current global pandemic. This will likely see a change in what is normally planted. To the short term and medium term, the government will be exploring our local food providers and home growers to maximize local food production. The Department of Environment and Natural Resources has placed its annual overseas vegetable seed order, and a large supply of packaging boxes and bags has arrived for produce coming out of the fields. The Ministry is currently working on a number of initiatives to increase our local food security, while I look forward to presenting to this Honourable House over the next several months. They will include a study of the opportunities for underproduced but locally desired produce, home growing opportunities, a strategy for putting more arable land into production, new regulations to manage aquaculture, and other fish-related initiatives being developed as part of the Blue Economy Strategy and as part of the Bermuda Ocean Prosperity Program. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, I must report that there have been several weeks where there has been a significant increase in theft from farmers' fields. While this is, in some respects, not unexpected, what is concerning is that there are reports that the produce is being taken and being sold rather than eaten. The public are advised that in addition to it being illegal to be out during the curfew hours of 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., stealing from fields is an offense. Officers of the Ministry of Home Affairs are ramping up their oversight of fields. Offenders will be prosecuted when caught. I would ask the public that if anyone who is not a farmer attempts to sell large amounts of produce to them, do not purchase this food. I would encourage members of the public to please report any suspicious behavior to the Department of Environment and Natural Resources at environment@gov.dm or telephone 236-4201. Members of the public and farmers can also report any incidents directly to the Bermuda Police Service by phoning 211, the emergency number. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to encourage those who have an interest to grow their own vegetables. Home gardening is rewarding on a number of fronts. It provides good exercise, time away from electronic devices, fresh air, and the ultimate satisfaction of picking your own food. I would encourage everyone interested to contact local plant nurseries for availability of seedlings and seeds for the hot summer vegetables such as cucumbers, squash, peppers, corn, melons, and carrots. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would like to take this opportunity to encourage the public to buy local and support our farmers and fishermen so that they can continue to provide for you. Lastly, please continue to follow all of the social distancing procedures to keep you and your local food producers safe during these challenging times. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Premier, the next statement is in the name of the Minister of Finance. Minister of Finance?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Morning.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I rise to provide this Honourable House with an update on the Ministry of Finance COVID-19 Fiscal Plan and the formation of government's new COVID-19 Economic Advisory Committee. Mr. Speaker, in my ministerial statement of the 8th of May 2020, I advised this Honourable House that to appropriately navigate the crisis created by the COVID-19 pandemic, we would require the input and advice from all stakeholders in the Bermuda community. And to assist, I would be establishing a COVID-19 Economic Advisory Committee. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to announce in this Honourable House the members of the new COVID-19 Economic Advisory Committee. I will chair the committee and have appointed the following 11 people to serve as members. Ms. Teresa Chatfield, Owner-Director of MEF Bermuda. Mr. Dennis Fagundo, Co-Managing Director, D&J Construction, President of the Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Chris Herbert, President, Bermuda Industrial Union. The Honourable Patricia J. Gordon-Pamplin, JP, MP, Shadow Minister of Finance and Health. Mr. Mark Grandison, President and Chief Executive Officer of Arch Capital Group Limited, and Deputy Chair, Association of Bermuda Insurers and Reinsurers. Ms. Cheryl Lister, Chair, Bermuda National Anti-Money Laundering Committee. Mr. Michael Neff, Managing Director, Bermuda and International Wealth, Butterfield Bank. Ms. Sylvia Oliveira, Chief Executive Officer, Walton Re Bermuda, and Chair, Bermuda International Long-Term Insurers and Reinsurers. Mr. Dennis Pitcher, Chief FinTech Advisor to the Government of Bermuda. Mr. Patrick Tannock, Managing Director, AXA XL, and Chair, the Association of Bermuda International Companies. And Mr. Stephen Weinstein, Chief Legal Officer, Renaissance Free Holdings Limited, and Deputy Chair, Bermuda Business Development Agency. Mr. Speaker, the first meeting of the committee was held on Wednesday, the 20th of May, during which time we discussed organizational matters, including the committee's terms of reference. The Economic Advisory Committee will provide insight, expert advice on how to protect jobs and stimulate economic activity during the economic crisis stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic. I look forward to working with this team to identify and eventually implement the measures to enable sustainable economic growth and mitigate social impacts of this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, honorable members are aware that to assist people out of work due to the economic impact of COVID-19, the government quickly introduced an unemployment benefit. As I mentioned at various press conferences over recent weeks, we continue to make progress to resolve problem applications, and last week we paid 1,241 applicants for the first time. Yesterday, we processed a mid-cycle payment to get funds to approximately 250 additional persons. Mr. Speaker, we will now have paid benefits to over 9,000 persons for a total cost of approximately $23 million. We expect further payments to continue on a bi-weekly schedule, which means another payment next Friday. It is important to continue to help people through these challenging times. This unemployment benefit, despite some startup problems, has provided temporary assistance to persons by providing financial support to meet their basic needs. Providing emergency financial relief to these families is a responsibility that this government takes seriously. Mr. Speaker, in the days following the Phase 1 opening of our economy, more than 500 people have notified the Department of Workforce Development of their planned return to work. I'm happy to report that this number has grown, and we expect it to continue as Bermuda entered Phase 2 of its reopening yesterday. While economic recovery may be a long road ahead, over 1,400 individuals have now returned to work or have notified us of their impending return to work. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to report the government has implemented further emergency measures to assist businesses that have a pressing need for financial relief as a result of this pandemic. The restaurant and bar sectors have been particularly hard hit by the significant decline in sales volume and job losses since the COVID-19 outbreak began. Accordingly, the government will immediately institute short-term relief from payroll tax to assist these sectors. During this quarter, ended 30th of June 2020, payroll tax will be set at the zero rate for the restaurant and bar sectors, and these businesses will also cease deducting payroll tax from employees during this period. Mr. Speaker, the fiscal implications of these actions will be a reduction in government revenue. However, we anticipate that this relief will ease some of the pressure on restaurants and bars, and especially lessen the pain being experienced by many Bermudians who work in this sector. Mr. Speaker, honorable members may recall that in the budget statement delivered earlier this year, I pledged, and I quote, "The Customs Department will ease the financial burden on retailers by making the customs duty deferral process more user-friendly. This will assist retailers with their cash flow, as customs duty will not be paid upfront, but rather after they have sold at least a portion of their goods," end quote. In keeping with that commitment, the Customs Department will, with immediate effect, allow retailers and other commercial importers to apply for duty deferment for up to 6 months on imported goods subject to a minimal surcharge. Mr. Speaker, whereas import duty is normally payable at the time each import declaration is made to Customs, by deferring duty payment, the time of payment is delayed for 6 months. Upfront duty payment can place a strain on a business's cash flow. This strain can be exacerbated by also having to pay overseas suppliers up front or on limited credit terms, and with associated bank charges on each transaction. This additional cost and the administrative handling of each payment increases the cost of trading. Duty deferment will allow customs traders, in particular retailers and customs clearing agents, to increase the efficiency of payment handling, increase cash flows, and reduce cost. Mr. Speaker, long-term duty payment deferral, more than 6 months, is also available in certain circumstances. Although duty deferment was not originally intended to address the COVID-19 crisis, by reducing import duty-related merchandise carrying costs, it is hoped that this government measure might assist some businesses to cope with the economic effects of the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, last week, the Senate passed legislation amending the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Act of 1998 to permit a person under the age of 65 participates in a private defined contribution pension plan or local retirement product to voluntarily withdraw up to $12,000 from the period that the act was brought into force until the 30th of June of 2021. To provide further support to employers and employees during this unprecedented period, it is proposed to amend the National Pension Scheme Occupational Pensions Act of 1998 to allow for suspension of employee and employer contributions for a period ending on the 30th of June 2021. By providing such relief for employees and employers, participating employees will see an increase in their take-home pay, and participating employers will benefit from a reduction in operating expenses. Mr. Speaker, this will be a temporary measure that will provide temporary relief to employers and provide additional income to employees. When the suspension of pensions comes into effect, this measure will provide relief and have a potentially stimulative effect on our economy, the stimulus to the economy being generated by the conversion of savings into consumer spending in the local economy and business investment in infrastructure and improvements. Mr. Speaker, this measure is mandatory. However, employers and employees can choose to make voluntary contributions should they wish. Mr. Speaker, the government is mindful of the long-term implications on a plan member's retirement income in permitting such suspensions. However, this concern must be balanced against the immediate and urgent needs in our community that have resulted from this unexpected crisis. Mr. Speaker, I can also confirm that the Cabinet has recently approved a suspension of social insurance contributions for employees and employers. This proposal will provide further relief to assist businesses and employees that have a pressing need for financial relief. This emergency measure will be similar to the National Pension Scheme suspension of contributions, and employers and employees can still contribute to the contributory pension fund if they wish. These proposals are sensible and intended to ease the financial burdens on employers and employees as we navigate this pandemic. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that to supplement reduced revenues and additional COVID-19 related expenditures, I will, as soon as today, execute a $150 million credit facility negotiated with local financial institutions. This will supplement an already executed $20 million credit facility with another financial institution. This borrowing capacity, together with current cash reserves and ongoing tax receipts, will assist the government in taking the appropriate actions to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 in the short term. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I wish to once again thank all of our essential workers and everyone who is on the front line working day and night to ensure our health and well-being. We are grateful for the sacrifice and dedication of all of those wonderful people keeping us safe, keeping this island operating while putting their own safety at risk. Thanks also to those businesses and individuals who are generously donating funds, resources, and supplies to assist in our efforts to fight this virus. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The next statement this morning is in the name of the Minister of Transport, Minister De Silva. Mr. Silva?
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Speaker. Am I coming through?
Yes, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Tourism and Transport is implementing today a super yacht tourism economic recovery plan to attract super yachts to our shores this summer. This plan introduces super yacht isolation charters and owner trips with specific super yacht pandemic policy guidelines during phases 2 and 3 of government's reopening strategy. It also provides for a soft reopening of Bermuda's borders for visitors until the airport commences commercial flights in phase 4. Mr. Speaker, by way of some background, the Super Yachts and Other Vessels Miscellaneous Bill 2019 became law on the 1st of January this year and provides for 3 types of vessel permits, and they are 1 transit, 2 cruise, and 3 super yacht charters. Originally, Mr. Speaker, this season for super yacht charters was thought to be a casualty of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, in April, local port agents received inquiries from owners, captains, and brokers about safe harboring and chartering in Bermuda while the pandemic situation unfolded in Europe, the east coast of the United States, and the Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, the Super Yacht Tourism Economic Recovery Plan demonstrates a direct response to local stakeholder recommendations who have expertise in this area. In addition, the unfolding super yacht scenario revealed a new economic recovery opportunity for Bermuda vendors while ensuring quarantine and mitigating measures remain in place before commercial flights commence. Mr. Speaker, working in consultation with the Ministry of Health, the Bermuda Tourism Authority, and local marine stakeholders, the Super Yacht Pandemic Policy Guidelines were approved by Cabinet to operate during phases 2 and 3 as follows. Until phase 4, all super yachts arriving in Bermuda must appoint a local port agent. Owners and guests of super yachts arriving by private jet or charter aircraft who join the super yacht are required to fill out the traveler screening form. Owners, guests, and crew arriving by super yacht must complete and submit the pre-arrival form and traveler screening form prior to their departure for Bermuda. Owners, guests, and crew must have adequate health insurance that includes medevac in the case of a person in case a person is found positive for COVID-19 after arrival or during their stay in Bermuda, or for any other reason a person takes ill and requires hospitalization. Any owner, guest, or crew can be denied entry into Bermuda and will have to return to their port or origin at their expense at the discretion of the Ministry of Health if persons do not meet the above requirements or are deemed not to be fit to enter Bermuda. Normal procedures, Passenger Ships and Other Vessels Act 1972 for application of super yacht transit, cruising, or charter permits apply. All vessels' owners, guests, and crew are subject to 14 days of quarantine aboard the super yacht beginning on the day of arrival in Bermuda. If the super yacht arrives prior to the owner or its guests, the 14-day quarantine commences again from the day of arrival of the last person who joins the vessel. During the 14-day quarantine, all commerce will be contactless and will be delivered to the ship via its port agent, including stores, provisions, and personalized shopping for guests. If deemed necessary by the Ministry of Health, during or following the 14 days of quarantine, COVID-19 PCR testing will be performed in Bermuda. The fee for testing is $300 per person and will be billed via the port agent. Once the 14-day quarantine period has ended, or if testing was deemed necessary by the Ministry of Health, and owners, guests, and crew receive negative test results, they will be permitted to come ashore and must follow all social distancing and mitigation regulations. If Bermuda goes back to mandatory shelter-in-place orders, all owners, guests, and crew will be required to shelter aboard the vessel. If Bermuda enters Phase 4 during the transit, cruising, or charter permit term, Phase 4 protocols will apply. Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda Tourism Authority's pre-pandemic report by Super Yacht Intelligence, The Potential of the Super Yacht Industry for Bermuda, suggested that the estimated weekly spend could be between $8,000 and $317,000. These estimates took into consideration the smallest super yachts at 24 to 30 meters with just crew, or crew with approximately 10 guests, as well as the largest super yachts at 80 to 90 meters with just crew or crew and approximately 20 guests. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the government of Bermuda would benefit from the new 6% charter fee for each charter. Mr. Speaker, local port agents currently use a combination of small and medium-sized vendors to fill requests for their provisioning needs. Produce and stores can vary on the occasion and the day for crew, and get more elaborate if the owner or charter guests are on board. One thing is for certain, super yacht chefs are eager to find made in Bermuda products and local farm-to-table fresh vegetables, fruits, fish, and dairy products. Quite often, I am told, Mr. Speaker, crew take a taxi on their own and visit local farmers and purchase fresh fish along the side of the road. For wine and liquor, the yachts are usually extremely specific about what they are looking for, and only certain merchants carry these products. Mr. Speaker, as part of this initiative, we have encouraged local port agents to collaborate with the Bermuda Economic Development Company to design isolation shopping opportunities online. This initiative is specifically designed for made in Bermuda products to include arts, crafts, jewelry, keepsakes, and clothing, to name but just a few. Delivery arrangements for samples and purchases will be made during the quarantine period and beyond. We see this novel idea expanding in the future. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the locally made products, this initiative also brings some economic recovery to wholesale, retail, restaurant, and marine service providers during the coming weeks and hopefully coming months. As we chart our way through these uncertain times, we are hopeful that a few interested super yachts will come to Bermuda during the quarantine period in phases 2 and 3, and ideally, several more will follow during the summer months as this initiative gains momentum. The guidelines will be posted on www.marinaports.bm, www.rccbermuda.bm, and on local port agent websites shortly. In closing, Mr. Speaker, economic recovery is something that the Ministry of Tourism and Transport strives for every day. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of my government colleagues and industry stakeholders who have worked diligently with us to get our island reopened in phases, and we look forward to slowly and carefully welcoming our visitors back to Bermuda. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The next minister's statement this morning is that of the Minister Pogo. Minister Pogo, would you like to present the statement?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning to you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning
Good morning,
to
Minister.
my parliamentary colleagues, and good morning to the listening public. Mr. Speaker, I rise before this honorable House to report on the role the Department of Youth, Sport, and Recreation has and continues to play during these challenging times for our community. Mr. Speaker, as the pandemic threatened our shores, the Premier made an early clarion call for us to do what we can to help the island get through these uncertain times. To that end, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Youth, Sport, and Recreation answered the call. In keeping with its motto, "Make it happen," many of the department staff made themselves available to assist workforce development with delivering on the unemployment benefits project. Mr. Speaker, the staff from the Department of Youth, Sport, and Recreation, along with the team from Workforce Development and other government departments, dedicated long hours and weekends to help get the benefit to those in need as quickly as possible. Mr. Speaker, I must give credit where credit is due and recognize my colleague and honorable member of this House, Minister of Finance, the Honourable Curtis Dickinson, JPMP, and his team who really drove this project and ensured that the benefit was paid out quickly to those in need. Mr. Speaker, at the beginning of April, Bermuda was under shelter in place with schools and daycare facilities closed. The normal programs of the department could not take place, including the after-school care at schools and at our community centers. The department offered their facilities and staff to assist the Ministry of Education in providing an e-camp for essential workers. The camps are being held at the Sammy Wilson Central Zone Community Center and at Dalwood Middle School. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of the e-camp was to provide care for our essential workers such as medical personnel, supermarket, store workers, and others to ensure that they could continue working. Mr. Speaker, the department's community center vans were also used to assist with transporting essential workers who are employed by the Bermuda Hospital Board to go to and from work. The vans and drivers even now are still available from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Sunday. Mr. Speaker, as we move through the phased reopening of Bermuda, the resources and work of the department will change direction to meet the new normal. The department is currently working on plans for the after-school program, summer camps, and the reopening of the community centers and their programs. This planning includes consultation with the Department of Health on best practices and protocols for minimizing the risk of COVID-19 transmission. Mr. Speaker, the department is also working with the national sports governing bodies on ensuring that their members are aware of the phased reopening of Bermuda and how that applies to their respective sports. We need to get Bermuda moving again as soon as it is safe to do so. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the staff at the Department of Youth, Sport, and Recreation for continuously answering the call and for operating outside the box. They definitely do make it happen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The next minister on the order this morning is the Minister of Education. Minister, would you like to do your statement?
Yes, Speaker, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this morning I rise to provide my honorable colleagues with an update on the planning and related activities undertaken by the Department of Education in preparation for schools reopening. A system plan is being developed that comprises 4 components. 1, planning for reopening, actions needed to resume school operation. 2, preparation for school buildings and plans for returning to the building. 3, recovery, transitioning staff and students back to normalcy. And 4, implementation of a hybrid learning model, teaching and learning for staff and students who are both in school and at home. Mr. Speaker, you are aware that the reopening of schools is planned for phase 3 of the government's phased reopening process. Since phase 2 of the process commenced just yesterday, we do not know when phase 3 will be rolled out. But what we do know is that a plan must be developed so we are positioned to receive our children back into our schools when the time comes. With this at the forefront, a collaborative effort involving technical officers at the department, school leaders from the preschool to the senior school level, and school staff via the principals instituted to obtain input and feedback for the framing of a system plan for reopening our schools. Mr. Speaker, just before the state of emergency was declared, all schools were officially closed. Officers in the Department of Education and the Ministry of Health and the Department of Environmental Health were working collaboratively, updating guidelines and procedures for schools to follow when dealing with a pandemic. This collaboration continued during the shelter-in-place via telephone conferencing and Zoom meetings that the health officers have played a pivotal role in providing expert guidance and support in developing safety and health protocols for schools. Their leadership, commitment, and technical support has been exceptional. Mr. Speaker, I will now share with my honorable colleagues more in-depth information about the details of the school system plans for reopening schools. However, let me first say that the Commissioner of Education, my permanent secretary, and myself have spent countless hours during the past weeks researching and sharing articles of literature that read on the best practices for school opening. It is important that the system plan for our public schools is both comprehensive and thorough. As such, we are pleased to report that the system plan was framed using accreditation standards, indicators of quality as a guide. Best practices were gleaned from school opening literature on international school jurisdictions such as New Zealand, Denmark, and Taiwan. The plan was also developed from guidelines outlined by international organizations such as UNESCO, the CDC, OSHA, and the World Health Organization. Mr. Speaker, the planning for a system reopening plan is a mammoth task and involves extensive consideration and factors that must be embedded in a strategy to ensure schools are safe for both students and school staff. In gathering data, our union stakeholders were invited to provide us with their input. As I was most pleased with the questions posed, comments made, critical observations highlighted, suggestions, and recommendations put forth by our union stakeholders. It was a good meeting, and the additional information received helped shape the system plan even more. Mr. Speaker, I must emphasize the importance of data to make sound and effective decisions. Therefore, in order to plan well, surveys were launched by the department to obtain data from parents and school staff. In light of COVID-19, we are cognizant that several students and staff may be at risk returning to school. Thus, the department sent out a brief survey to our parents to obtain potential numbers of children who will return should schools open. Mr. Speaker, although some thought this survey was a bit premature without knowing the details of the health and safety protocols, we knew that a number of our children may be at risk, and thus there would be parents who would definitely take this into consideration and not send their children back to school. This data was relevant and was needed to help with our planning. Similarly, Mr. Speaker, in order to determine what schools could reopen, the department had to assess staffing levels. School staff are asked to share if they deemed themselves as vulnerable in alignment with the Ministry of Health Guideline. The data received from school staff thus far, although preliminary, allow for meaningful projections for potential school opening. Mr. Speaker, parents, guardians, school staff, the general public, and my honorable colleagues all want to know what the Department of Education is doing to ensure safety and health of children. Let's look at school building. The department has factored in so many considerations as the safety, health, and well-being of students and staff are of paramount importance. When schools closed in March, our school custodians undertook thorough deep cleaning processes using a deep cleaning protocol guide. This was followed by an inspection check. Since March, custodians have been working in their respective school buildings 3 times a week to clean and ventilate the facility. During the week of May 4th, the custodians undertook another deep cleaning process in school, and inspections are presently underway. We are thankful for the work of the custodians who play an integral part in ensuring a safe school facility. When we are ready to reopen schools, our custodians will ensure the ongoing cleaning and sanitizing out the day of highly used surface areas in school. Mr. Speaker, other specific building protocols the department will be implementing include ensuring a current inventory of hygiene supplies at every school, posting of signs throughout school buildings as reminders of physical distance, student education on regular hand washing, assessing the layout of classroom spaces to determine maximum occupancy of students, and posting signs to remind students of entry and exit procedures. Mr. Speaker, survey results indicated that many parents want to know the details of safety and health protocol. I'm pleased to report that the Department of Health has developed draft safety and health protocols for pre, primary, middle schools, and our School for Children with Special Needs, DAME. These protocols define the safety and health actions when students and staff first arrive on the premises. They stipulate how to drop off students at school if arriving by car or motorbike, how they walk up to the building entrance and prepare to enter the building with temperature taking and hand sanitizer stations. The protocol continues as students and staff move along hallways, clearly marked, outline how students engage in learning in their classroom, sitting at their desks, the procedures to follow when using school bathroom, during recess, snack, and lunch breaks, and outdoor play activities. These safety and health protocols, although prepared by the Department of Health, have been vetted by school principals and their school safety and health committees or COVID response team. Mr. Speaker, these protocols were all pre-tested this week at a preschool, a primary school, a middle school, and our School for Children with Special Needs, DAME. I shared in my press conference on Wednesday that the pre-test team comprised of the following key stakeholders: Department of Education Technical Office, school principals for the selected schools, schools custodians and the BIU school custodian representative, Department of Health, healthy school officers, and school nurses, the Bermuda Union of Teachers Safety and Health Committee representative. Mr. Speaker, the pre-test process was detailed and thorough. The safe and healthy protocols are generally all the same for schools, with some differences for our younger children at the preschool and students at our special needs school, DAME. When the pre-testing of the protocols was undertaken this week, the team was provided with the different sets of protocols for each school as they walked through the school building and began to visualize what the practice actually entailed. There were close to 15 persons on the pre-testing team. Mr. Speaker, the team visited all buildings at each of the selected schools, all floor levels, and many classrooms. The team discussed areas such as which entrances the school would use as entry and exit doors. They discussed how hand washing hygiene would operate, bathroom protocols, physical distancing protocols, what surfaces would require the continuous cleaning and logistics for different classes. The pre-test of the protocols was more exhaustive for our special needs school, as the team visited the therapy room, multi-purpose room, the nurses room, sensory room, time away room, all classrooms, and all bathrooms. The findings are now being collated, and the data will steer what improvements must be made to finalize the protocol guideline. Mr. Speaker, pre-testing of protocols will also need to be done for every school prior to schools reopening, so that they are customized for approximately the particular school, or appropriately the particular school. Additionally, the department will undertake audits before any school reopens to ensure that all of the safety measures and protocols have been effective. It is our intent to do what is needed, so when the Ministry of Health advises that it is safe to reopen our school, then we are ready to receive our students, knowing that parents and guardians and school staff are assured it is a safe place for teaching and learning. Mr. Speaker, I also wanted to share more about teaching and learning for our students. Our stakeholders are aware that the current remote learning model includes online teaching, learning and services using a variety of application and platforms, plus the provision of learning packets for students without devices. At the preschool level, students' online individual learning with their teacher accounts for 30 minutes FaceTime per day, while online learning with other students range from 1 to 2 hours per day. Our preschool teachers engage in online teaching with 3 to 5 students at a time. Teachers also pre-record themselves for students to revisit and reinforce concepts. Our teachers at the primary and middle levels are following the essential curriculum to be taught and will focus on teaching students the relevant curriculum standards. On average, our primary school students are spending 9 hours per week engaged in remote learning with teachers. Our middle school students are engaged in 4 40-minute face-to-face class via remote learning with their subject teachers and up to 2 hours of independent classwork via online platform. Our teacher develop assignments or tutorials for extra support. The time differs for work carried out with core and on-core teaching. Mr. Speaker, on Wednesday, I shared with the media and general public testament from one of our parents to the work that our teachers are doing. That parent shared that her child's teacher does, and I quote, covers English, mathematics, science, and/or social studies. The teacher designs lessons and assignments to be interactive and engages with students through the use of various digital manipulatives and resources such as video storybooks, digital libraries, and STEAM experiments, end quote. Mr. Speaker, I encourage my honorable colleagues to read the testament from the parent as I included the full submission in my press statement. The department also received questions about servicing students who require special or individualized support. Students who require individualized services are students on an IEP or individualized education plan. Our learning support and specialist teachers, such as ASD teachers, who would normally teach and provide services for students when they are in the physical building, are now providing remote teaching and services to IEP students individually or in small groups. Mr. Speaker, last week I personally participated in a Zoom assembly at the Academy at the Heron Bay Primary School. Testimonials from both students and parents was moving. One parent was brought to tears on how well the remote learning was going for their child. However, Mr. Speaker, as schools move forward with new teaching and learning, it is critical for parents to ensure students are available for online instruction and complete the learning activity. Parents should also check that the work completed for our students who receive learning packets in the mail. Mr. Speaker, on Wednesday, I shared that at the senior school level, the students are continuing their regular program and schedule and are on target for completing their courses. The senior schools are presently following Cambridge's guidelines for awarding assessed grades to students who are due to sit IGCSE examinations in May and June. Let me add that our primary and middle school students are being assessed on an ongoing basis using a variety of assessments. Students have to complete which are provided and which provide evidence of what they actually know and can do. The work can be a typical assignment like solving a math problem, reading and then writing responses to questions to show understanding. Or they may be asked to take a video of themselves doing an experiment or task as evidence that they can actually do it. There are instances when the teacher can see firsthand what students know and can do via Zoom. Other times, students are asked to upload their work as evidence of what they can do. I can personally attest to this as I look forward to the notices from the P6 teacher at Elliott Primary. Let me know that my daughter's work has been marked and is available for viewing via Class Dojo. COVID-19 has required teachers at the primary and middle levels to examine the number of learning standards that remain to be taught for each subject, to identify the most critical standards, and then teach those specific standards. Mr. Speaker, I applaud our teachers. They are committed to sustaining the remote learning model. It is new, but together we will continue to work through improving it as remote learning is becoming a part of our new normal. Mr. Speaker, let me close by reminding our parents who are returning to work during phase 2 that the department is organizing an educational support program for your children while you go to work. On Monday, May 25th, the education support program will start for primary and middle-aged children. The preschool education support program will start on Wednesday, May 27th. All students will continue to engage in remote learning programs for their respective school at a central venue. I must emphasize that the educational support program is only for children whose parents must return to work during phase 2. Only these parents should contact their child's school principal. Lastly, I want to assure our parents that physical distancing will be practiced at the educational support program, as well as implementing safety and health protocols stipulated by the Ministry of Health. We will provide further details about the educational support camp directly to parents who have begun to contact the school principal. Mr. Speaker, we encourage our educational family to continue to use the BPSS family feedback form to send their questions, concerns, complaints, and kudos about the work taking place in our school and at the Department of Education. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. And that actually brings us to a close of the statements for this morning. The next item on the order paper is reports and committees. And we have a report from the Deputy Speaker in regards to the Standing Orders Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To members of the Honourable House of Assembly, the Standing Orders and Privileges Committee has the honor to submit the following report. 1. The committee held a meeting on the 20th of May, 2020, to consider a proposed amendment to the standing orders to facilitate the conduct of virtual meetings of the House and committees which have been conducted recently and possibly in the foreseeable future. 2. During this meeting, the committee agreed to the following amendment to the Standing Order 7. Add 7.1a to read as follows. Notwithstanding any other standing orders, where it is impracticable by reason of a public emergency or any emergency as agreed by the Speaker, after consultation with the Premier and the Opposition Leader, for the House or a committee of the House to meet physically, the Speaker may grant leave for the House to meet virtually so long as the Speaker is satisfied that the business of the House may be conducted through electronic means that permits members to be seen and heard by the Speaker or by a chairperson of a committee. 3. Mr. Speaker, I now move that this new amendment to the standing orders be adopted as read.
Members, the Deputy Speaker has given a report from the Standing Orders Committee into the recent amendment that was adopted by the Standing Orders Committee. Are there any objections to the acceptance of this new amendment to our standing orders?
No objection.
Objections?
No, sir.
Okay, we take it that it has been accepted, and for our listening audience, that amendment gives us now the ability to be able to meet virtually as we do. If you have noticed, on our sittings thus far, we've begun by asking for the suspension of the standing orders, which enabled us to be able to sit virtually. Now we will not have to ask for that suspension whenever we sit virtual. It's now part of our standing orders. When the need arises for us to sit virtual, we have the ability under standing orders to do so. Thank you to the Standing Orders Committee. We now move on to the next order on the order paper, which is the question period. And as you know, it's a 60-minute period, and it's now 11:13. And we have first some written questions. The first written question that we dealt with today is from the Honourable Opposition Leader to the Minister of Works, the Minister Burridge. These are 3 questions, and they are asked to be responded to orally. The Opposition Leader, would you like to put your question?
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yes. To the Honourable Minister, please inform this Honourable House whether the Valerie Scott building demolition was put out to tender. Read all three.
Mr. Speaker, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, I hear people walking.
Could be your mic, Minister. You had someone walking around behind you?
No, D. Burgess says, anyway. No, there's nobody walking.
You know what?
Okay.
The deputy has just moved his location and he probably still has his mic on.
Okay.
Okay, continue on.
All right. The short answer is yes. But as I have stated publicly before, our intention was to combine the demolition process for both the Valerie T. Scott and the Allenhurst buildings. So in the interest of sorry? So in the interest of full disclosure, I will provide details for both buildings. That plan didn't work as the two buildings are registered separately. The Department of Planning required 2 demolition permit applications, so the buildings were tendered separately. In accordance with financial instructions, the budget estimate for these demolition projects was such that there was no requirement for them to be advertised.
Cousin, how are you? All right, thank you. Yes, cousin, have a good day.
In the normal manner on the government portal or advertised in the local media. Because these demolitions are specialist in nature, the location, complexity, and time sensitivity, a selective tendering process was used. Quotes were invited from 5 local contractors that specialize and are experienced in these type of works. They are Accurate Excavation, Building Blocks Limited, Butterfield Excavating Limited, Island Construction Services Limited, and Smith Hauling and the Excavating Limited. Site visits were conducted and all 5 contractors attended. 4 contractors returned quotes by the due date. End of answer.
Supplementary or
Thanks. Yeah, I'll move on to the second question. Taking into consideration the minister answered part of the second question as well. So I will move to the second part of the question, which was which company won the bid?
Island Construction Services Limited for the Valerie Scott building and Smith Hauling and Excavating for the Allenhurst building.
Further supplementary or new question, or your third question?
No, that's fine. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, and then the third question partially answered as well, but will the Honourable Minister please inform the House of the company names and the dollar amounts submitted for each bid?
Answer. For the Valerie Scott building, Building Blocks Limited, $61,805. Butterfield Excavation Limited, $44,100. Smith Hauling and Excavating Limited, $31,153.24. Island Construction Services Limited, $29,752. For the Allenhurst building, Building Blocks Limited, $350,733. Butterfield Excavating Limited, $199,000. Smith Hauling and Excavating Limited, $75,989.50. And Island Construction Services Limited, $229,735.
Thank you, Minister. Is it supplementary, Opposition Leader, or are you complete?
Just a supplementary on the first numbers. I believe he said it was Allenhurst, where blocks was 61,000 and Smith 31,000 plus Island Construction 21.
27,000. Can the minister just speak to it's quite a varied amount in the bids that came across during this time where it's difficult. I kind of thought that many of these companies would most likely be coming in very, very competitive. Can he speak to as to what would make blocks come in at 61,000 and Smith Hauling at 31,000 plus, basically half the amount? What were the efficiencies in some of these things, and the broad terms that he found as to why he then went with 27,000 with Island Construction?
It was actually 29,000. What we did,
29. Sorry.
What we did was to select the lowest bidder in each case. And in fact, there is a real backstory to this, which is internally with our technical officer, it made sense to us to award both contracts to one contractor for the simple reason of mobilization, and just the buildings are next door to one another. And in fact, there is a what's the term? A common wall between the two buildings, and much of the infrastructure was interconnected. But because the buildings are listed in two different addresses, we needed two different applications, so we put out two different tenders. At the end of this process, we have decided to award both contracts to Smith Hauling as the lowest bidder on the largest contract, so that it would be one contractor on site. Not surprising, that decision did not sit well with the Office of Project Management and Procurement, who implied we were simply attempting to circumvent financial regulations, as the two contracts together then exceeded the $100,000 that requires cabinet approval. Apart from taking a great exception to the suggestion that I would be party to something unlawful, I took the view that this accusation and simply concluded that a common sense approach was yet again defeated by the bureaucracy. And that, I would say that's probably the source of my greatest frustration in this job. I did not wish to delay the project the several weeks that cabinet approval would take, so we reverted to approval of both contracts to the lowest bidders. Island Construction for the Valerie Scott at 29,000. Smith Hauling for Allenhurst at 75,000, both of which are under the internal estimate that the ministry made on these projects in the first place. I think that there is a greater disparity between bidding on the Allenhurst building, where the range is from $350,000 to at the highest bidder to $75,000 the contract was awarded. I asked that question naturally of our technical officers, and it comes down to the individual decisions and risk assessment of bringing those buildings down, particularly the Allenhurst building, of each contractor, and that's why the cost varied so much. But I don't mind telling you at this stage that our internal assessment of the Valerie Scott building was $30,000. And we awarded a contract for $29,752, and for the Allenhurst building it was $130,000. So our contract $75,989.50 was awarded.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was very helpful.
Thank you. That brings us to close of the written questions for the first set of written questions. The second set of written questions are from the Honourable Petlin, but they are for written response only, and they are to Minister Wilson. MP Petlin, have you received your written responses?
I have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The third set of written questions are from MP Dunkley for Minister Wilson, and they are to be answered orally, and there are 3 questions. Minister, MP Dunkley, would you like to put your question? MP Dunkley?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Good morning.
Morning.
Will the Honourable Minister please provide to this Honourable House the name of the manufacturer and source country for the antibody test being used by the Molecular Diagnostic Laboratory at Southside?
Before the response, I should indicate that standing orders allows for another member of the cabinet to answer, or junior minister to answer on behalf of the minister. And I believe that Premier, you may be responding on behalf of Minister Wilson.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in response to the question, the response is Heliogen Scientific LLC, and the source country is the United States of America.
Thank you.
Thank you.
MP?
Yeah, thank you, Honourable Premier. Supplementary question. In what other jurisdictions or countries is this test actively being used?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe that is the second question of which was asked, so it wouldn't be a supplementary, but I'm happy to move to the second question if the Honourable Member wishes to do so.
No, Mr. Speaker, the second question has different wording.
Can you repeat your question again?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, glad to. In what other jurisdictions or countries is the test actively being used?
Mr. Speaker, I do not have an answer to that question, as we have not tried to survey out of the thousands of tests which are in use in various countries to provide such an answer and supplementary, so I do not have that.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Premier, any idea how long this test has been in use?
In Bermuda or in the world?
In the world.
Can't answer that question.
Okay, happy to move to question 2, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, go to question 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Honourable Premier please inform this Honourable House which reputable international regulatory body has given approval for the antibody testing being used by MDL at Southside?
I thank the Honourable Member. I thank the Honourable Member for his question. The tests have been approved for inclusion in the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, ARTG, by the Australian Ministry of Health Therapeutic Goods Association. It should be noted, Mr. Speaker, certainly, that the Australian Therapeutic Goods Association represents a country that certainly has done particularly well during this particular epidemic, and the Therapeutic Association is a Commonwealth government agency that regulates medical devices and drugs, prescription medicines, and over-the-counter medicines, which meet Australian standards of quality, safety, and efficacy, and are included on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods.
Thank you, Honourable Premier. Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Honourable Premier, what is the sensitivity rate for this test?
The sensitivity rate for this particular test depends on whether or not it's looking at IgG particles or IgM particles. The submitted sensitivity rates of which were seen on the submissions of which have been made to the global bodies is IgM sensitivity of 87.9% and IgG sensitivity of 97.2%, with a specificity of 100% on both counts. On our local testing, we found this to be rather reliable. There was a first set of testing that was done with a sample kit, which was provided, which had 100% matches on known PCR positives and known PCR negatives. And thus, after 25 of these tests were ordered in Bermuda, we decided to order more because they worked here and they were subsequently approved by the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. So certainly we had confidence that at least an international regulator of repute that looked at these tests, and we are comfortable to deploy them here. These tests cost $6.50, whereas other tests that were trying to be sold in Bermuda were in excess of $20 a piece.
Thank you. Premier, supplementary?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Second supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Premier, do you consider this test a diagnostic test or for research purposes?
It's not a question of whether I consider the test for diagnostic purposes. It's the application of the Ministry of Health. I think the Minister of Health has been very clear inside their statements, and I don't think that any particular regulatory body uses these particular things for diagnostic testing. Diagnostic testing is what is used and we use PCR testing for that to diagnose active infections, and that is the gold standard. These tests are not used for diagnosis of active infections, but these tests can certainly be used for persons if they want to, not necessarily persons, but for understanding the epidemiological impact of a particular virus on a society. So they have been done at Southside. They're being administered in conjunction with the various PCR tests. And I'll just do statistics. Out of 1,103 persons that in the general population who have been tested, 32 persons have tested positive for either IgG or IgM antibodies, which is a 2.9% rate of exposure. And of the 32, we see known PCR positives, spouses of PCR positives who are themselves PCR negative at the test, or other close contacts of PCR positives who were themselves PCR negatives. Also, there were suspected positive cases who did not fit the WHO definition at the start of the local pandemic, so they were not tested. And also those who were in known outbreaks overseas, such as cruise ships, or those persons who never suspected having COVID-19 and were possible asymptomatic carriers. And it is the antibody testing that we're using. We have secured more supplies and we'll continue to be administering those with the in conjunction with the drive-through PCR testing, which is taking place at the Southside Lab. It'll be further rolled out to other locations.
Thank you, Premier. MP, that was your second supplementary. Would you like to move on to your third question now?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Honourable Premier, the Honourable Minister of Finance informed this Honourable House on the 8th of May sitting that $2.8 million of increased emergency funding have been provided to the Ministry of Health for COVID-19 spending. Will the Honourable Premier please inform this Honourable House if any emergency and increased funding to the Bermuda Hospitals Board is included in this amount?
Premier?
Mr. Speaker, the answer to that question is no.
Yeah, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, good morning. The answer to that question that's posed by the honourable member is no.
Okay. MP, supplementary?
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Minister of Finance, in full disclosure, the Minister of Finance last night sent me answers to questions I had asked after a statement on May 8th, which said that there were amounts included. So I'll allow the Minister of Finance to interject here and give some clarity.
Of the $2.8 million that was spent, $1.75 million was allocated to BHB.
No.
Mr. Speaker, if I may.
Supplementary from MP Thompson. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Health said categorically no, there was no money appended to the hospitals board, and the Minister of Finance has just indicated that there was a 1.7, I think he said, $1 million. Can the Minister of Health explain the reason why she's out of the loop in this situation, or appears to be? Sorry.
Okay. Thank you for that question. From the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, the 1.75 million, it was not directly to BHB. It was because BHB helped to procure the items for us. Those items went to the Southside facility for use by not only the items, meaning PPE, excuse me. Those items went to the Southside facility for use for not only the Ministry of Health, but us as well, the essential services such as fire, etc., persons that are requiring the PPE. So for accounting purposes, and I use that word in inverted quotes, speaking to an accountant, the hospital, the the warehouse at Southside is where the PPE was being stored. but the 1.75 million wasn't to give to BHB. It was so that they could source the supplies on our behalf for the acquisition of PPE.
Thank you. I will pass on a second supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a question that needs to be clarified offline, but I will speak with the minister.
Okay.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
This is your second supplementary.
No, I haven't had a supplementary on this one yet. That was the Shadow Minister Health question, Mr. Speaker.
Didn't you respond when the Minister of Health responded? And you brought in?
No, I asked the, thanks to the interjection from my honorable colleague, but Mr. Speaker, I asked the question to the Minister of Health, and the Minister of Finance gave some clarity to it. So I haven't got to a supplementary yet.
Well,
my question, Mr. Speaker, was simple.
let me hear what your question is going to be first.
Okay, my supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary question. Since the Honourable Minister of Health has given this explanation, can the Minister of Health now provide this Honourable House if the Bermuda Hospitals Board has some additional COVID spending to date?
Minister?
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, the hospital would have also secured PPE and had expenses related to that for the PPE that they would have required for Bermuda Hospitals Board.
Okay, can the Honourable Minister please provide some details on the cost of that, Mr. Speaker?
That's your second supplementary now. This question that you're putting to her now. So repeat it again for it. That's your last supplementary. Go ahead.
Can the Honourable Minister please provide details on the additional cost spent and what items they relate to, Mr. Speaker?
Thank you.
Thank that honourable member for that question. It is approximately $3 million that have been spent by BHB for the their securing of PPE. It is also my intention for honourable members to be delivering a ministerial statement outlining the expenditures as it relates to COVID-related services as well as supplies for both the Ministry of Health and the Bermuda Hospitals Board in due course.
Do I have another supplementary, Mr. Speaker?
No, you used them up.
Oh, sorry. Just checking.
Two supplementaries.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Thank you,
And
Mr.
that
Speaker.
brings us to a close of the written questions. So now move on to the questions from the statements this morning. And there are quite a few members who have questions. Premier, your question this morning, there are two members who would like to put questions to you. The first is the opposition leader. Honourable member, would you like to put your question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier aptly quoted a song, "I Get By With a Little Help from My Friends," and on page 2, he mentions call on friends in U.S. to unstick a process that stood to deprive Bermuda of its much-needed medical supplies. Just curious as to when did those negotiations start, as far as talking to our friends abroad?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it would be very difficult for me to recall the exact time, as the last 2 months has been a blur with very little sleep for many of us. I do know that there were certain shipments that were either shipments that were ordered on behalf of the government of Bermuda that had contained PPE, and after the president had issued an executive order banning the export of PPE from the United States, there were some of these particular things which were held up. I think that some of them were ordered by local companies or the hospitals board, etc. So we did reach out to our contacts in Washington, D.C., try to get those particular shipments unstuck, and they were unstuck in consultation in conjunction with the U.S. Consul General here in Bermuda as well. So grateful to them for their assistance.
Thank you, Premier. Remember, supplementary or another question?
Supplementary. If I were to look at the time frame, I guess it was around April or early April
that we had a report of this confiscation of goods, potentially from Bermuda and other places. So the question that I have then is, taking that time frame in mind, when did we then finally get approval from abroad that they would not confiscate shipments that potentially were en route via the United States to Bermuda?
With regards to the question of the opposition leader, I believe there were reports of other countries, and there may have been local media houses here that were making speculation things. When it comes to us dealing with our international partners, we try our best not to fully publicize the details and such. I do not remember the exact date when the president's executive order went into effect, but the president's executive order did impact a number of items. For us, the issue was only dealing with, I think it was a shipment of surgical masks and other items which had been ordered through local suppliers. I think that was it. And I know that those particular matters and assistance with certain congresspersons from the Congressional Black Caucus, in addition to work of our lobbying firm of record, the group in Washington, D.C., in addition with the U.S. Consul General, we were able to make sure that those things got passed. But it was an executive order issued by the president that stated that PPE items could not be exported from the United States. And there was some lack of clarity on those things, but we managed to get them sorted. They were ordered beforehand, and we managed to make sure that we got them into the island as we did certainly need them.
Supplemental?
Yes. Taking that into consideration, was when you said these were orders by private individuals, were these orders that were put in place to accommodate BHB? Armin?
Sorry, opposition leader, as I indicated before, I'm not trying to be evasive. I just actually don't remember the circumstance around this. I do believe that at this particular time, if I remember correctly, it was an order from a local supplier, and the local supplier was placing an order for the Bermuda Hospitals Board. That is the best of my recollection. There wasn't one of our large orders from China. For instance, it was something here. But yeah, it was Medical House that ordered something for the Bermuda Hospitals Board, and we were assisted by our friends in the United States.
I have a supplementary, if I may, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary, yes.
Thank you, sir. For the Premier, if you could explain, clarify for us, if possible, we heard of a flight that was coming from China initially via the United States and then ultimately circumvented the United States. Did we ever get that shipment from China that we, or was that shipment part of that that we were precluded from receiving? There just was no clarity around that.
Sorry, the two of those things, the two individual circumstances have nothing to do with either one. This had nothing to do with the large shipment of goods, which came from Asia, which there's been a number of particular shipments of goods, which have come from Asia. So this was a completely different circumstance in its entirety.
Thank
you. Opposition leader, do you want another question? Did you put one question and two supplementaries? Did you have any more questions? Opposition leader? None?
The second question? Yeah, second question. So is the Premier saying then that we are now not under that threat any longer? And I know it's been difficult for him to give us a timeline as to how long that's been. But I wasn't looking for the exact day. I was just looking for approximate time frame. So from the beginning of April, we knew that this was a major issue. We had heard about it, as we said, about other jurisdictions. Are we now no longer under that threat from shipments via the U.S.?
So I'm sorry. So I'm clear, and because of course work remotely allows us to go into the computer, so I can go into my emails. The news release came on April 8th from the Customs and Border Patrol and FEMA joint statement on the Defense Production Act for PPE. And so this particular issue, so it was, the order was issued by the President of the United States on April 3rd. I know that we were having issues towards the middle of the month, so I want to say around April 16th or April 17th. We haven't had any problems or issues since. I think that there is a broader understanding of the items, and so I think it should be clear that, and I don't want honorable members to focus on, I don't want honorable members to focus on the broad sensational headlines from other countries of things being seized and ventilators being seized and all those types of items. As I said, we only had one particular issue, to the best of my recollection, with one particular shipment, which had happened during this particular point in time. We were able to get that particular shipment released. I am uncertain of anything, well, not to my knowledge, it has come to my desk. Things may have been handled through the mechanisms of government that they didn't actually come to my desk. But this is the one particular case and instance that I know that we had to start to use the best of our efforts in our relations to make sure we got these particular matters cleared to come into the country.
Supplemental?
Supplemental from, let's say, opposition whip?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning. In all of the ordering of supplies and all of the shipment complexities, did we ever, Bermuda, find that we had paid for equipment or supplies we paid for that did not ever arrive in Bermuda?
I don't have any knowledge of that, and I don't think so. I think we've been able to make sure that we have got our supply lines up and running. I think I indicated it the last time the House spoke that we put together a procurement committee to assist the persons who were doing procurement for the country. There was a recommendation from a member of the opposition to sit, not a member of the opposition, but a recommendation from an opposition leader to be included in that group. There's a few others that were making sure they were using their international contacts in shipping, et cetera, to make sure that we got things here. So I don't actually think that we've had much problem since then, and I don't think that there's been anything, to my knowledge, that we paid for that we haven't received. But I'm happy to ask any cabinet colleagues if there's anything, and be happy to make sure we report that. But I don't actually believe that was the case, and I believe there was just one particular issue.
Okay, thank you. Opposition leader, you had two questions. You've got one more question, your third question. Are you going to put a third, or we're going to move on?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. The next number will indicate that a question for you is actually the number MP Terrell. MP Terrell, would you like to put your question?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you.
Good morning.
Mr. Speaker, I note on page 5 of the Premier's statement, the Premier's recognition of PPE provided by the UK government. Can the Honourable Premier please advise how much PPE was able to be sourced by the government of Bermuda to date by other sources? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. In regards to the total amount of PPE, yes, the government of Bermuda was certainly grateful to Her Majesty's government for the supplies that were contained on the airbridge flights. However, in addition to the 26,095 masks which were ordered or which were supplied by the UK government, the government of Bermuda itself ordered 600,000 N95 masks and 200,000 K95 masks. In addition to this, we ordered, 600,000 N95 masks and 200,000 K95 masks. In addition to this, we ordered 700,000 surgical masks as well, and which was supplemented by the 3,000 surgical masks, which were provided by the United Kingdom. In addition to that, we ordered a large number of aprons. We ordered cartons of face shields. We ordered 480 digital thermometers, which could be used in isolation gowns. So there's been a robust ordering process that has made sure that we had our stocks in place. And these stocks, certainly we ordered 600,000 N95 masks in total. And our stocks are that we have 510,000 of those masks still in stock.
Supplemental, Mr. Speaker.
Supplemental.
Supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, I'll let the opposition leader go first, and then I'll ask a question after that.
Opposition leader?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Franklin. Considering the assistance from the UK, was that an offer made to us, or did we seek out the UK for assistance?
That was made to all their overseas territories, and as part of the air bridge flight, and we're grateful to certainly accept any assistance that was given. We have to remember that during the time of the first air bridge flight, there was intense difficulty regarding testing supplies, regarding lots of different things, and there were things that were hit and miss as well. I know that honorable members will recall there was lots of conversation, discussion regarding the procurement of swabs. And when the first air bridge flight arrived, I want to say that it was around April 6th or something, there was actually supposed to be 5,000 swabs and BTM on that flight. And unfortunately, there were not those swabs, and they came on the next flight, which was a supply that we were expecting to receive, which kind of set us back, so we had to go scrambling and to look for other instances. But I think this was assistance that was given to all overseas territories, certainly during that particular period. It was certainly welcome, but as I think you said before, we accepted the donations graciously, and we've also made sure that we secured the amounts of which were necessary and needed to make sure that our healthcare workers remain safe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Someone else admitted they wanted a supplementary. Is that MP Dunkley?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Honourable Premier, who the UK helped us with a great deal of supplies, as the Honourable Premier has said. Who are the local suppliers of PPE that have stepped in and helped?
I would not be able to answer that question, as I'm not directly involved in that particular matter. I'm not certain if Minister Wilson would like to respond. Okay.
Minister, would you like to assist? No? Okay.
Okay, I appreciate the second supplementary, and I appreciate the Honourable Premier bringing the information when he has an opportunity. Second supplementary, Mr. Speaker, can the Honourable Premier provide the costs of the air shipments to bring in private supplies by local suppliers?
Mr. Speaker, I believe that all those particular items will be outlined when the Minister of Health gives her statement on the total expenses incurred today for the coronavirus response. And I think that all the members, we were expecting to have that done today, but I think that all the members can expect an update next week. And I think it'll be at that point in time, all the members can ask whatever questions they wish on the cost related to the supply.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, next week's a holiday, so I don't mind meeting on the holiday.
We are 2 weeks from now, our next sitting, my apologies.
Next sitting, yes. Okay. Those are your supplementaries. Any other members? You have a supplementary? Is that MP Franklin?
Yes, thank you.
It's a supplementary.
Thank you, sir. Could the Premier advise how the community physicians are being supplied? Is the government supplying them? Are we sort of got a central point and private physicians are coming to through the government to get supplies for PPE and the like?
As that does not fall under my remit, if the Minister of Health is on the line, I'll ask her to respond.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if that question could be re-asked. I didn't hear it all.
MP Franklin, could you put your question again?
Thank you, sir. The question is, how are the community physicians supplied for PPE and the like? Are they getting from the government central supply? Is government supplying the physicians? Or what is the procurement process to the PPE and medical supplies required getting into the hands
of sorry about that. I'll have to get back to the honourable member. I do believe that many of them have supplied their sources, their PPE sources locally through some of the local distributors. And we were looking into obtaining more PPE. We currently, I should say, are looking into obtaining more PPE so community providers can assist, can get it from and I'm saying south side, but that the warehouse that we have with all the PPE is in south side, not to be confused with the government laboratory of south side. So there's two ways to answer that. One is that many of them are securing it privately through the local distributors that provide PPE into Bermuda, as well as you'll see that there's quite a lot that's in stores to source as well. And we are also looking to source more of the economy scale, and that we will be providing that at cost to persons that require it.
Thank you. And just follow up supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Your second supplementary?
Yes, sir. Is there a procurement process from the doctors in order to be able to obtain supplies that they might need from Southside? If the minister could, deliver that message perhaps publicly, so that so that doctors are made aware as to how they can access those supplies.
Thank you, Honourable Member, Shadow Minister, for that, and I make sure that that's clarified. I actually was on a call, I think it was last week, that the CMO has with all of the medical community, and many of these questions did come up concerning requirements of PPE and the clarification of how they can source it. So thank you for that, and I'll make sure that information is communicated accordingly.
Thank you, Minister. That now brings us to a close of the questions for the Premier's statement. We now move on to the second statement, and that's from the Deputy Premier. Deputy Premier, you have members who wish to ask you questions. And the first question is from MP Dunkley. MP, would you like to put your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Honourable Deputy Premier, what steps have been taken to protect food security, indeed our supply chain, by ensuring no virus contamination takes place on the supply ships that serve Bermuda?
If you're talking about shipping, I think that's a question for the Minister of Transport. But I will attempt to deal with the issue of food. There are regular meetings that have been held.
Excuse me, Deputy Premier, I understand that. I refer directly to the supply ship. So if the Minister of Transport wants to answer, I'm worried about contamination. The crew's been quarantined for weeks, maybe months on that. What is being done to make sure that we don't cross-contaminate by people coming on and off the ship?
Well, shipping was not a subject of my statement, so I think you might want to provide those, other than I was in discussion with shippers about ensuring supply. The actual issue that you raised is something that I think is something that has been in the media, and you might want to direct your questions to the Minister of Transport.
Okay, so you're unable to answer them.
Those are not questions that were the subject of my statement.
Your statement is about food security, but if that's what you wish, I will direct them to the Minister of Transport.
Well, let's not make the debate back and forth. The statement, the statement basically did speak to, I guess, the local part of what was being done and not the import piece. And
exactly.
The ministers indicated there's probably more under the remit of transport. So, if you have another question?
No, I respect that. I'll move on, but it does talk about the island supply chain, Mr. Speaker, but I'll move on to that. Okay. No further questions on this one.
Okay. The next minister, you have a further member I'd like to put a question to you. That's from the MP Simons, MP Cole Simons.
Yes. Can the minister speak to the challenges or issues that are taking place at the Devonshire Dock?
Minister?
That's a question, but the Devonshire Dock was not the subject of my statement.
The subject of your statement was about fishermen. And I'm asking because a fisherman stopped me and they said that the government prevented them or put a restraining order on them, and so they had to move. So I just wanted to know what the details were.
Okay, thank you for the clarity on the question, because you asked about the dock. And docks are not my remit, but yes, fishing is. And the answer to the question, Mr. Speaker, is that there are certain places that have been allocated that are safe for, as as was referenced in my statement, for fishermen providing sale of their catch. The Devonshire dock was particularly problematic because of the logistics of it, and it is not an area on like assessment by my team that social distancing or physical distancing and the requirements that are needed for like the fishermen to safely participate in selling their catch could be carried out. So what has been done, so that's why there are a number of other sites. There is further to the west down at the docking stool, which is available. But I can also inform the House, Mr. Speaker, that an alternative is being devised for the fishermen who might be able or who want to sail at Devonshire Dock. I happen to know that one of the fishermen has actually moved to the docking stool to sell his fish, but I know there are others, so we're going to devise a alternative site for them, which is in the vicinity.
Supplemental.
Yeah, supplemental.
Yes. So can a fisherman choose his own site, or does the site have to be designated by the government? Because yes, I've seen the fishermen at docking stool, but can other fishermen who were at Devonshire Dock go elsewhere and sell their fish without any restriction?
Yes, as long as it's at one of the sites and the appropriate guidelines can be adhered to. And those guidelines were like detailed in my statement. But as it relates to the specific Devonshire Dock issue, I am working with my team to devise an alternative site for them, which is in the vicinity. For the selling fish.
Okay, thanks. My second question, because I go to these docks quite a bit, so I speak to some of these fishermen. There was a recreational fisherman that has a little boat, and he goes out fishing for his family. And if he has access, he might sell it to another fisherman who can sell it. But the challenge that he faces is that he cannot go fishing with his family member. He's not a professional fisherman, so he doesn't have a mate. How can we help these fishermen, recreational fishermen who do not have fishing licenses, go out fishing with someone to fish, to supplement their food, basically, and also supplement their income by selling their catch to other fishermen, commercial fishermen?
Well, all due respect, the answer to the question is a little challenging because you're actually talking about fishermen who don't have licenses to sell fish being given permission to do activity where they can carry out an illegal activity. So I have a little concern about that. So I do believe that the regulations have recently been amended so that recreational boating can go on within the allocated time of the curfew, and they can have more than one person on the boat. That was the subject, I believe, of the recent changes to the emergency measures.
So it is very, very difficult to secure a fishing license. So is there, during this time of COVID crisis, is there a possibility that we may be able to relax the license so that people can supplement their income by selling fish during this period only? Because it's tough to get a fishing license.
Yes, there are limited fishing licenses, you are correct, but that is for reasons that you would know as a former Minister of the Environment, is to protect our fishing stocks. During this time, our fishermen are out, and I believe that they are adequately supplying our country with fish and are able to sell that fish. The regulations have been relaxed so that people who rely on recreational fishing to supply their own needs can now go do it. Those were the changes that I believe were the subject of the recent announced last week. So that was an issue, but that's been rectified. But as you know, as a former Minister of the Environment, person selling fish commercially without a license is not legal.
I accept that. So my question to you again is, given these unusual circumstances...
MP, this is actually your second supplementary, see?
That's fine.
Yeah, So your last supplementary.
So given that these are unusual circumstances, given that we waived the rule for other, to support small businesses and other individuals, can we make a similar relaxation for recreational fishermen who are in dire straits to sell their catch during this period only? I understand the environmental impact, but as you said before, we are trying to help the man in the street who has challenging times economically. And this could be a source of income for them. So we've done it for other industries. I don't see why we can't do it for this period for the fishermen. So can you address that issue for the recreational fishermen who are on dire straits, who might be able to make some income out of fishing just during the COVID period?
We can consider a number of different things. I would, as you would know, as a former environment minister, this is a matter that would have to go in front of the Fisheries Council, who oversees the fishing industry. So I would have to put the question to them, and I will rely on their advice.
Thank you. That's all my question for.
Hey, Martin?
That's my only. That's it for me.
Thank you. Minister, Deputy Premier, that actually brings a close to the questions for yourself. We now move on to the next statement, and it's for the Minister of Finance. Minister of Finance, you have a series of members who would like to put questions. The first one is from MP Pearman. MP Pearman, would you like to put your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Minister of Finance, Honourable Minister, your statement talked to certain elements of proposed relief in the coming months and for COVID-19. Have you any plans at this moment? Currently, there's an unemployment benefit that was supposed to last for a 12-week period. Have you any views at this moment whether that 12-week period will be extended?
We are assessing that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And another area.
Supplementary, new question.
Supplementary, all on the relief points. Supplementary, another identified area of relief was the payroll tax zero rate for the second quarter. Do you have any plans to continue that into Q3, the third quarter as well?
Yes,
we have. So the payroll tax relief comes at a cost to government revenues, and honorable members will recall that when I last spoke about this, I talked about trying to bring in a deficit number of $150 million down from a projection of $315 million. We will need to assess the state of the economy, and so my view is for the relief that I'm providing for the restaurants and bars, we're going to look at it on a quarter-by-quarter basis and assess it appropriately, because the last thing that we can afford to do is make the hole in a deficit bigger. So we will manage it as we get the benefit of some experience kind of doing so.
Mr. Speaker, next question.
The second question, continue.
Yes, you also deal in your statement with customs relief. At the bottom of page 6 of your statement, you talk about customs duty applications for relief being considered with immediate effect, and you state subject to a minimal surcharge. What does that mean? Does that mean that there's going to be a cost if one applies for relief, or that if you get a deferral, there will be some sort of interest charge on the deferral? Or there is a fee that Customs has charged historically for the granting of duty deferment. Supplemental?
Yes.
Would the minister consider waiving that fee?
I would need to take advice from Customs on that, on waiving that fee. One of the things that you honorable members need to be aware of is that the deferment of duty is actually a cash flow drag on the government, and I need to fund the government. And if I can't get the cash from the taxes that are due from duty, then I have to go and borrow the money. And perhaps if the banks will waive the fees on my borrowing, then I can probably pass on those savings to those persons who participate in a duty deferment program.
Mr. Speaker, supplemental and final question.
Yep.
Minister, page 7, also on duty, customs duty, you talk about long-term duty payment deferral of more than 6 months available in certain circumstances. Is that a new or existing form of relief, and what are those circumstances?
That is an existing form of relief, one that has seldomly been used, I think partially because of the administrative burden and the process that has been in place. And what I had mentioned in my budget statement early in this year was that Customs was going to go have a look at their processes with a view towards streamlining the processes to encourage a more active use of the duty deferment program.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative MP? Is it your last question, you said?
I'm done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. Minister, the next member has a question for you is the member, Franklin. Franklin, would you like to put your question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, to the Minister. On page 10 of your statement, Minister, you indicated that you are in the process of extending some credit facilities. Could you inform us of the terms and conditions of the credit facility for both the $150 million that you're planning on signing today, as well as dollars currently in place?
With respect to the 150 facility, I don't have the documents in front of me, so I'm recalling from memory. It's a facility that will expire in September of this year. The pricing is in the range of about 4 and 4.25%. The banks involved are HSBC and Clarion. The view is that I think I had mentioned earlier in the budget statement of the year that the government would be contemplating doing a capital markets capital raise with the view towards refinancing credit facilities. In the case in February, I was referencing the Morgan's Point facility. Now it will include any funds drawn down on this facility, the Morgan's Point facility, and the incremental $20 million facility. We have had the Debt Advisory Committee convene a meeting, have conducted interviews with respective banking organizations, and I'm waiting for a recommendation from them around the timing of accessing the capital markets, as well as the quantum of any potential financing and potential liability management exercise.
Thank you, Minister. A supplementary?
No, I have a separate question.
Separate question, go ahead.
Yes. Page 2 and 3 of the Minister's statement in respect of the 11 committee members who are participating on the Economic Recovery Committee. Could the Minister, for the edification of the public, confirm that that industries that have not been specifically represented by the 11 members of the council will be represented by subcommittees that will feed into the overall work of those committees? I think that concerns when people say there's no retail people on the committee, but I don't want retailers to believe that they've been left off. So could the Minister just offer, for the edification of the public, that all sectors of the economy will be considered?
So I'd like to thank the member for that.
This ends at 12:13. It's now 12:12.
Thank you, sir. If the Minister
it's fairly short form, Mr. Speaker. The intention here is to have a broad range of people representing the broad economy. The Chamber of Commerce is represented, and there is broad representation in the retail and other sectors within the Chamber of Commerce, but there will be, it's contemplated to be a subcommittee structure underneath the principal committee that will be targeted towards certain industry verticals.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think I can get one last question in. That is,
you didn't get an answer when you get your question here quick. Oh, that's it. We're not at 12:13. We started at 11:13. That brings us to 60 minutes of our questions now being closed. Thank you, members, for your participation. And there were quite a bit of members who wish to have asked further questions for statements given today. Unfortunately, time hasn't allowed that. So we'll move on. The next.
A technical difficulty at the beginning, so we should have been allowed an extra minute. But
no, not on this one. But with the moving on to the order paper, the next item on it is the congratulatory and obituary speeches. Does any member wish to speak?
Speaker?
Yes, that sounds like Minister Birch.
Yes.
Go ahead, the clock is starting.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to offer condolences to the family of Ethan Richard Buddy Wilson, who you may recall may be known to you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
He worked at the quarry and could handle any machine we had down there. And you, in fact, commended him in 2007 for the work that he did installing the replacement Bailey bridges.
Yes.
And I'll be looking through the file, obviously. I'd like to send condolences to his widow, Leanne Wilson, his children, Keisha, Keitha, and Keisha, and the wider family. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to extend congratulations to Mr. Mitchell Johnson, who I'm sure is known to you as well from Somerset.
It's actually family now.
Huh?
That's family now, but go ahead.
He retires today from the ministry after 21 years of service, most recently at Mars Folly. And anybody who knew him would know that, he had no debate over what team he would support in any sport. And it would be our team, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
In best. I'm hoping to be able to put in a cameo this lunchtime. They're having a small celebration for him, no more than 10 people, to be able to at least commend him and wish him well in his retirement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister Birch. Does any other member wish to speak?
I do, Mr. Speaker, if you would oblige.
Yeah, the clock is on. Over.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence, I would like to read a short email that I received from a gentleman that had an experience at Transport Control Department. And it goes like this. Good day, Mr. Speaker, Mr. De Silva. I am a senior and would like to take this opportunity to personally commend you and the government for your awesome work for our country. I had the honor to visit TCD over the last couple of weeks to license my motorcycle and my car, and also to retake my driver's test. So on all occasions, the staff I encountered were of the highest professional standard, respectable, polite, and giving precise advice. I'm fully aware of the volume of people in attendance, but the services rendered were remarkable and at a very high standard, considering the stress with COVID-19. I was also pleased at the ease of relicensing the vehicles online. I found the portal quite friendly, and I renewed my licenses online. And I'd like you to be kind enough to acknowledge the personnel at TCD for their unwavering professionalism during these very difficult conditions. And Mr. Speaker, I say that this letter was received by a senior, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank him, Mr. Speaker, Paul Singh. You may know him; he's from up in the West, and yes. I'd like to thank him for thanking the staff at Transport Control Department, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank them as well, Mr. Speaker, for them coming in during that period when many people stayed home. And as you know, Mr. Speaker, it can be trying times for us all, waiting in lines and getting a little impatient. And I think they've done a tremendous job. And I'd just like to emphasize the fact that their efforts are not only appreciated by me as the minister, but also the management at TCD. And of course, as you can tell by this letter, the public at large.
That's it? Minister?
That's it,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Speaker.
I recognize the Deputy Opposition Leader.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, and thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, members and listening public. Mr. Speaker, I would first like to start off with condolences to the family of James Arnett Llewellyn Tennyson, who passed a couple of weeks ago due to the virus. Lou was a very dear friend of mine, and he was always supportive of me in my endeavors. He was always helpful to me, and I would like to extend my condolences to his family and to his wife in Guyana, and to his young son, Alex, and his son, Lou Tennyson Jr. I'd also like to offer congratulations, Mr. Speaker, to Inspector Troy Glasgow, who has reached his hallelujah moment that we're all looking forward to. And today is his last day with the Bermuda Police Service. So I'd like to congratulate him on his retirement, commend him for his work, and thank him for his service for the community and to the people of Bermuda. I wish him all the best in his retirement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to.
Thank you, MP Scott. The next I had on the order was Premier. Premier, would you like to give remarks?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate all of Bermuda's graduating students and extend a special congratulations to the 2020 graduating class of the Bermuda College. Yesterday, the Bermuda College was due to have their graduation ceremony, which unfortunately had to be canceled due to COVID-19. However, they've organized a week-long celebration next week that I'm looking forward to being a part of. Also, as we know, we've seen on social media and in other places where there have been many times and instances where there have been persons who have graduated overseas with their college degrees. By graduating during these times, our students have proven their dedication and commitment to their studies. Though they may not have been walking across the stage, I would like them to know that they have made their families proud, and I join them in celebrating their successes. Congratulations again to the class of 2020, and I wish them all the best in their next phase of their lives. Mr. Speaker, I would just like to give a special thank you right now, if I may, to Chef Fred Ming, who has so graciously dropped off supplies of fish chowder and shark hash for all members of the House of Assembly here at the Cabinet Office. He was just here in my office, and he is a man who continues to uphold the cultural traditions of Bermuda, and so it is greatly appreciated of the work in which he continues to do.
Thank you, Premier. The next member, MP Meehan.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. I begin my remarks today on a somber note because I'd like to extend condolences to the family of Ms. Beryl Broadley from Coupon Road in St. George's. Ms. Broadley, there isn't any political person that would never have passed by her door. She is one who always offered an encouraging word. She did as much as she could in our community, Mr. Speaker. Everybody in St. George probably had her coconut cakes, her fudge. She would graciously share the recipe with you if you wanted it. Ms. Broadley had a large family in St. George's, and I'd like for all of her children, her grandchildren, her great-grands to know that they truly are in our thoughts and prayers at this time. The one thing about Ms. Broadley, Mr. Speaker, that I really can recall is that she's been married to her husband. She was married to her husband for 75 years. Oh. And so the fact that they have that bond after 75 years is remarkable. It's an inspiration to those persons who are aspiring to just keep on going sometimes. So, Mr. Speaker, I want the Broadley family to know that they are in our thoughts and prayers. And I'd also like to associate MP Kim Swan and Minister Fogo with my comments as well. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much.
Thank you, MP Ring. I'll now recognize MP Sylvan Richardson. Richards.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, good morning. I would like to be associated with the condolences offered to the family of Mr. Llewellyn Peniston. Llewellyn Peniston was a very familiar sight around the House of Parliament. We always shared a chuckle about our travels to places that we like to visit. And I was very sad to hear about his passing due to his ailment. I'd like to offer condolences to his family. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to offer condolences to the family of Mr. Davis Tannock, father of Patrick Tannock, most of us are familiar with. Mr. Tannock was a quiet man, but he was a very respected man in the ward community, and his family are true living examples of.
I like this virtual.
Somebody got
like it's talking to you.
Mr. Silver?
Oh, wait a minute. Hang on a minute. I'll call you right back. Hang on.
I got him. Go ahead, Mr. Richardson.
Okay. Yeah, so I just want to offer condolences to the family, the Tannock family on the passing of their patriarch, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, MP Richards. The next I have is MP Pantler. Would you like to make your comments now?
Yes, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to be associated with condolences to the family of Aniston. I was a former senator, in a legislative capacity, and I would also like to associate myself with condolences to the family of Beryl Broadley, whose granddaughter Lori is actually a very good family friend. Also with the family of Davis Tannock. The family of Davis Tannock, Mr. Speaker, who actually is brother to my late aunt Eleanor. So I sort of know the Tannock family quite well, and clearly we offer our condolences, especially to his son Patrick, who we all know is quite a contributing individual to our society, to our community. I'd like, Mr. Speaker, to offer condolences as well to the family of Scott Cooper. He's the husband of Alexis, as well, and they are from Paget. As well as I would like to offer condolences to the family of Pilot Brian Richardson, Mr. Speaker. Pilot Richardson was such a wonderful individual. His daughter Mickey is a friend of mine, and she's obviously, as every family member would be on the loss of a loved one. They are faring not very well. But I think it's important that they all know that they are in our thoughts and prayers as they go through these trying times of not just having to funeralize their loved one, Mr. Speaker, but having to do so under circumstances that are so strained in terms of people not being able to reach out to them to give the normal friendliness and support that we might normally be able to do. So I would just ask that I have those condolences offered to the families of those people to whom I mentioned. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, MP. The next on the list is MP from the East End, my friend, Mr. Swan. Down there wearing his blue and blue probably today, Mr. Swan. Mr. Swan?
Yes.
You lost the reader like your team?
Mr. Speaker, point of order, you're going to have to give me another 3 minutes for that comment. That's very unparliamentary and disrespectful to the great. Yes, please withdraw. George is counted on you to be impartial toward us. Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to be associated with the condolences offered to my friend, the late Llewellyn Peniston, former senator, and also, like me and you, a former Southampton Glebe under Dalton Tucker. To the family of Mrs. Broadley, I thank the honorable member from constituency number 1 for being associated with that great, condolences to that great lady who has passed on. And also to the family of the Tannock family as well. Also, Mr. Brian Richards, who was one of our branch pilots for many years, the honorable member, Mr. Gordon Pampton, gave condolences, and whose life has been captured on CITV with his contributions to the pilot in Bermuda, as many from St. George's have done before. And also to the family of Mr. Charles Hillgrove Gibson from Coral Acres, a dear family friend, who has passed. Our condolences go out to his entire family, and to the Coral Acres Granavay Heights community, and to the West End Sailboat community, because he loved his comet racing as well. And Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, MP Swan. The next member I have here is MP Famous. MP Famous, like to make your contribution?
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, colleagues, and good afternoon, Bermuda. I just want to give condolences to the Tannic family. They used to live Hermitage Road, Lightbourne Lane. Also to Mr. Snake Eversley, another resident of Devonshire on Roberts Avenue. Mr. Kenneth Jolliffe, who was of Hermitage Road in Devonshire. And another gentleman who lost his life this weekend, Mr. Henry Santucci. He was actually a quote-unquote guard outside Alaska who 24 hours a day. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Famous. I have Mr. Simons. Simons, would you like to give a contribution?
Thank you. I'd like to associate myself with the comments made in regards to Scott Cooper. He worked with me, and his wife is a secretary of Peter Lightner Scholarship Arts Foundation. He recently passed, and I'd like to associate my comments with him. But more sadly, his mother passed just 11 days after him. So I'd like to send our condolences to the whole Cooper family in that they've lost mother and brother and husband within 11 days. I'd like to also associate myself with the comments made in regards to Mr. Davis Tannock. He is a family man. He was obviously a PLP supporter. And I'd like to associate my comments to his family and Patrick, who I've known for years. I'd like to also associate myself with the comments made, I think it was done, but it may not have been done, Montague Shepard. As we know that he was a pioneer when it comes to broadcasting and the empowerment of Black people in the broadcasting industry. He was a trailblazer, and he is a man to change the season. And so to he and his family, I wish them my sincerest condolences, and that his contribution to Bermuda's history from a broadcasting point of view was stellar and is not going unnoticed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member. Does any other member wish to speak? Condolences or congratulations?
Mr. Speaker, I do.
Is that Mr. Tyrrell?
That's me, thank you.
Mr. Tyrrell, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately in C-26, we lost quite a few people whilst we were in shelter in place. And I certainly would like to send condolences to the members of the family and the friends. And I'll say in order, Ms. Etoile Birch, who was actually in her 99th year from Bulkhead Drive. A person that I know that you would be familiar with, Mr. Speaker, Mrs. Janice Dill of Lusher Hill. I understood she was your aunt. So please accept my condolences as well. Mr. Wesley Squader Sr. of Smith's Avenue passed during this period. And finally, Ms. Pearl Smith of Random Lane. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to take the opportunity to send condolences to the family of my wife's aunt. And actually, I believe she is a constituent of the Honourable Premier of Cox's Hill and Pembroke, Verna Butterfield, lovingly known as Cookie. She was a very, very lovely person, very kind to me when I came into the family, and she will be dearly missed. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member, does any other member wish to speak?
I think I have my hand up on the system.
Yes. Deputy Premier?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to be associated with the condolences to the family of Mr. Tannock. He was obviously somebody well known to the Progressive Labor Party family, but I personally and my family have had a long association with the Tannock family for generations, going back to my grandparents. So it would behoove me to not ensure that my voice was associated with the tribute to him and the condolence to him. His children are all friends of mine, and I can remember as a very young boy being in the presence of Mr. Davis Tannick, but also his own parents. When I was a young child in Cedar Hill, I remember being visiting the Tannick homestead, where Mr. Davis Tannick originates, although he cut his PLP sword in Smith's Parish for us, of which we are great appreciative. And it should be recorded he is a member of the class of PLP candidates that ran in '68, of which we recently paid tribute to another member, hallowed member of that class as well. But he was also one of the candidates who ran and held the banner for the PLP in '68. So certainly our party has given him tribute, and it's great that the House is also giving him tribute as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Deputy Premier. Is there any other member wish to speak? I see MP Lister from constituency 28.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to also associate the comments with condolences to MP2, to Mr. Janice Deal, who happens to be my great aunt as my grandmother's sister. I'd just like to give a few comments on her that she was, and I can be correct if I'm correct, if she was the first Black head of the post service, I believe.
Black postmistress.
Postmistress, yes, I stand corrected. And she was also one of the leaders of the Bermuda Salvation Army, and she represented the Salvation Army at the, again, stand be correct, the coronation of the Queen Elizabeth in the 1950s. So yes. All right, thank you. So she has definitely played her part and did a lot to Bermuda. So as a relative of hers, I just want to also to the rest of my family send condolences. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak?
Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
MP Atherton.
Yes.
I'd like to be associated with the condolences sent to the family of the late Verna Cook Butterfield. Verna was actually my cousin, and you don't realize that someone gets a name by things that they do when they're a child. And she was an excellent person who could make cookies, and also because we were a very similar age, we were what I was going to say partners in crime, but really partners in enjoying fun, because we were children that would go out and be able to enjoy what was happening in Bermuda. So I'll miss her, but I also recognize that she battled an illness, and we had many more years to her life than we thought we would have. So I think she'll be missed, and I'd just like to express my condolences. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honourable member. Does any other honourable member wish to speak? No other honourable member? I'm just going to take a few minutes before we close out this and just add a couple of remarks myself. As was said already by MP Terrell and MP Lister, Ms. Janice Deal was the first Black postmistress for Bermuda. She was very much a strong soldier in the Salvation Army and quite a leader in the Girl Guides Association in Bermuda. As my aunt, she was almost a second mother to me as a youngster. I tell people I'm from, as all of you know, I'm from the red and blue area of this island, but I spent a lot of time in Warwick, where my mother is from. And when I was in Warwick, I was with my aunt Janice at her house. She was like a second mother to me. And her passing will surely be missed by not only what she done in our community, but deeply by her family. I think of her son Clarence and his wife and children at this time. I think of Rebecca, who was a young lady that my aunt took in quite a few years ago and raised her in her household. And I'd just like to, share my thoughts at this time, knowing that they have felt her loss very deep. My condolences go out to them. With that, members, the indication was that we were going to go to lunch from 1 to 2. I thought the condolences may have taken us close to 1 o'clock. It's now 12:38. Would you like to go on? Well, let's have the government bills introduced, and let's see where time leads us there. So the next order on the order paper is matters of privilege. There are none. Personal explanations. There are none. Notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance. There are none. Introduction of bills. There are 4 government bills to be introduced. The first 3 in the name of the Premier and the 4th from the Minister of the Silver. Premier, would you like to present your bills at this time?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am introducing the following bill for its first reading, so it may be placed on the order paper for the next day of meeting. I'm sorry, may I do them all at once, Mr. Speaker?
You do them all at once, yes.
Thank you. I'm introducing the following bills for their first reading so that they may be placed on the order paper for the next day of meeting. And those would be the Summary Offenses Amendment Act 2020, Emergency Powers Amendment Act 2020, and Cost of Living Amendment Act 2020.
Thank you, Premier. Minister De Silva, would you like to put your bill?
Mr. Speaker, yes?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I stepped out to the men's room. Can you come back at me, please?
You are the last item under this category, the government bills of the, you need to put the merchant shipping amendment.
Yes, I got you. Yep, got you. You ready?
Yes, we're ready.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, I'm introducing the following bill for its first reading so that it may be placed on the order paper for the next day of meeting. Merchant Shipping Amendment Act 2020.
Thank you, Minister. That brings us to a close of the bills. There are no opposition bills, no private members' bills. There's notice of a motion. Premier, would you like to put your notice? Premier? Your mic is off, Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that at later points in the meeting, under orders of the day, I will move the following motion. That this Honourable House take note of the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Precautions Amendment Number 2 Regulations 2020 and resolves that the duration of the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Continuing Precautions Regulation be extended until the 30th of June 2020.
Thank you, Premier. Members, that brings us to the start of the orders of the day. One more motion. One more motion.
Yes. May I?
Talk to me.
Go ahead. It's on the order paper. I will read it.
Talk to us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I give notice that at the next day of meeting, I propose to move the following resolution. Be it resolved that previous resolutions House made pursuant to Section 2 and 15A of the Ministers and Members of the Legislature's Salaries and Pensions Act 1975 be revoked, and be it further resolved that pursuant to Section 2 of the Ministers and Members of the Legislature's Salaries and Pensions Act 1975, that the annual salary will payable to members of the legislature listed in Part A and officers of the legislature listed in Part B of the table below shall be as set out in column 3 of the table with effect from the 1st of July 2020 until the 30th of June 2021, and with effect from the 1st of July 2021 to the 31st of March 2022 shall be set out in column 2. And be it further resolved that pursuant to Section 15A of the Ministers and Members of the Legislature Salaries and Pensions Act 1975, the contributions towards the cost of pensions payable under the Act by members and officers of the legislature shall be reduced by 12.5% of their salaries to 0% of their salaries, with effect from the 1st of July 2020 to the 30th of June 2021, and with effect from the 1st of July 2021 shall be increased from 0% of their salaries to 12.5%.
Thank you, Premier. No, you didn't want me to leave that one off. Members, that brings us to the end of the motions and things we introduced this morning. The next was actually started on the orders of the day. As I indicated, we were going to take a lunch from 1 to 2. Being we're about to start on an order, I would think we would want to start fresh from there. So with your indulgence, I'd ask that we take lunch now and be back at 2 o'clock. And we'll start with the first order of the day, which will be the second reading of the Development and Planning Draft Bermuda Plan 2018 Extension Act 2020. Members, are you in agreement with us?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to ask that the House to adjourn for lunch at this time to come back at 2.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Members, any objections to that? No objections? Members, we'll now break. Be back at 2 o'clock. I would advise that rather than turn off your systems and maybe have a problem getting back on, if you just mute your mics and your video, the system will remain on until we return at 2 o'clock. Enjoy your lunch, members. The House stands adjourned now until 2 p.m.